get it back even. That's true. Yep, and then also that liability falls on us. That's a really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, yep. Yeah, yep, and to, and not have to worry about liabilities. That's the time when things do get bad, because you're trying to. Yeah, yeah, but you gotta have a plan to do it. Totally. Well, then something's gonna, yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that makes sense. How could you lay it out? Yeah. He left for. What's the discussion? And if we can show the value of it. That'd be awesome, because that person probably would have too.
We're good. Yep.
That's awesome. That would be huge. Yeah, sitting in Hunter's spot, that's funny.
You said it's student council meetings would sometimes last 7 hours.
What?
So this isn't too out of the realm.
All right, it is 6 o'clock. I will call the Sartell City Council meeting to order for Monday, December 11th. Please rise for Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Council, next on the agenda is the agenda review and adoption. We do have a amended agenda with item 6O. I would take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve the amended agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Open forum, we have one person registered for open forum public comment tonight. Peter Wilson, the floor is yours. You can state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Peter Wilson, 1108 Celebration Drive, Sartell, Minnesota, 56377. I was a little disappointed in the last meeting we had regarding the solar panel issue. I thought it was poorly decided. The issue with solar panels, I think, is misunderstood by many, and the consequences, it's hard to say what they will be. No one really knows. And like most things, I tried to explain what I have seen as far as pollution claims and been involved with. It does not take much of a search, and I'm sure this was done by all of those involved, repeatedly and recurringly, and on a continual basis, to look at what solar panel radiation's impact is, and the effects of these things, and how they impact those living next to, or those animals, plants, and water areas. So again, I could care less on solar panels, other than they are very, very negative. There are many negative consequences. There are good consequences at times to things. In talking to me, I would visit with you gladly regarding how we used to play with mercury in school, in our hands. That was common, and yet it's now looked at in a shocking fashion. We used to just hand it around to each other. So what you might think is normal now will be different. I found that to just be a very bad decision. Hopefully it will be reversed, or perhaps if the radiation issues are as bad as it appears to be, there will be maybe the high school can come out and do projects and check that on an ongoing basis. That would be a good thing for them to do. The other thing I want to bring up, and I have mentioned this before, is the United Nations involvement at all of the counties and cities, especially the green steps, welcoming cities, and other things. This includes ICLEI's involvement. I would like to have the City Council review these matters, where they have created the agenda, the purpose, and the reason for these things to exist, and are maintained on an ongoing basis by those at the city. Having met with the predecessor of the current persons who's administering the United Nations programs, I found that she was quite aware of this and seemed, I would say, comfortable with it, but uncomfortable talking about it. So I would like a review of it, and if everyone in front of me is not aware of your position or your status as to how many things you've been passed on or how many have been approved, I recommend you learn that. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, next on our agenda is the approval of City Council minutes from November 27th, both regular meeting and special meeting. I'll take a motion for both of them, or we can take them separate.
I would make a motion to approve both.
So motion to approve both items. Is there a second? I'll second. Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those carry. Consent agenda, we have items A through O. I will pull item D and item O. Are there any others? Otherwise,
L, can you pull L? I would like to pull L, please.
item L.
Yes.
We have item D, L, and O. I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda items with the exceptions of D, L, and O. Is there a second? I'll second. Motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Item D, personnel policy. And Anna, you might have to help me here. I don't have my laptop open on it. Personnel just had a meeting prior to this. We reviewed this, and there were a few tweaks that we wanted to make. I believe it was page 10. Some maybe
Whistleblower
edits.
policy, yeah, revising some of the verbiage in there. I can catch those.
It's under no retaliation, under whistleblower.
Yep.
I apologize. I'm gonna grab this quick. Yeah, under the
Under page 9 and 10, under the accounting and auditing matters, to remove the term credit union, and then it was also under
Before that, it was
Before
we had
that-
vice president.
Yep.
Represented, so just a couple roles that we don't actually have within the city.
Under the reporting, yep, I can make those
reporting,
edits.
And then we're gonna add in, personnel committee. As level of, escalation.
Yep,
And then the last item was under section 3.7. Personnel committee reviewed that. Good with the minor changes that are in there, but we would desire some further discussion, and as we get into HR position, have some flexibility. So you'll see item, especially 3.7, come back in a future council meeting. Is that fair representation? Okay. Council, any questions on any of that? So first part is a little bit cleanup, just to make it more specific to City of Sartell, and that second item, we just felt like, as we're reviewing this, there's some more detail that we wanted to add in on 3.7. Okay. I'll make a motion then to approve item D with the changes mentioned. Is that sufficient for your notes?
yep, I've got it.
Okay.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on item D? All right, and I got my notes up, and it looks like it is encompassing of everything we discussed, so. All those in favor of item D signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Judd, I'll go to you on item L.
Yeah, and I think my only question on L, and it kind of relates back to D as well, just the process of, there's a lot of changes with safe and sick time and some of those things. Just want to ensure that, this go through the attorneys. Is that an annual review for our policies?
Yeah, yep, any of the policies that, come to a council on the consent or new or old business has the attorney review prior to bringing it here.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there were multiple changes on this one as well, and I had to convert from a PDF to a Word, and so I think this one didn't have the red lines on it, correct me if I'm wrong? It probably was more difficult to see what the changes were, and they were just bulleted out, but they did get, legal review.
Okay. Then I will make a motion to approve L.
We have a motion to approve L with no changes, right?
Correct.
Okay. Motion to approve L as it stands. Is there a second? I'll second. Motion and a second on item L. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Finally, item O. Item O is the resignation of our fire marshal, Butch Reland, and I simply wanted to pull it to publicly thank Butch and for all of the efforts he's put into our community. I think as you drive around any public building, commercial building, multifamily building, he had his blood, sweat, and tears poured into most of that. And it was a thankless position, thankless role. I know our chief's working on, our personnel had some conversation today. I know our chief's working on a plan for how we're moving forward and what those positions look like. So I have high confidence there, but really just wanted to pull the item to publicly thank Butch for everything he's done for our community. So with that, I will motion to approve item O.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. We have one public hearing tonight, and that is on the 2024 final levy.
Yes, good evening,
Over to
Mayor,
Rob.
members of council. Before we open up the public hearing, I thought I'd just cover the highlights. If I can find the PowerPoint.
Rob, is your mic on?
Yes.
Perfect.
So agenda, go through the budget process, look at tax levy, tax capacity, how that contributes to tax rate, and review budget book and next steps. Process really began in the spring when we approved our strategic initiatives, followed by our revised financial policies and financial management plan, all very instrumental in how we shaped our budget, which brings us to our final levy approval today. Tax levy is how much property tax the city wants to collect. In 2023, it was 9.2 million. In 2024, it's proposed at 10.1 million. 9.6% increase, just over 1 million from 2023 to 2024. And as you can see there, I highlighted the capital funds from 0.5 million in 2020 to 1.4 million in 2024 in our efforts to mitigate future debt. So 7.2 million for the general fund in that last slide, that's a large number. What does that consist of? So majority of the expenditures are people related. Over 70% of the general fund are expenditures for salaries and benefits, most set by labor agreements, state law, or federal law. Services and charges include engineering, legal, consultants, liability and workers' comp insurance, and supplies, utilities, pretty self-explanatory. So changes from 2023 to 2024, the big one being salaries and benefits increasing 816,000 or 12% due to 3.2% COLA increase, an average of 15% health insurance premium increase year over year, 3.25% step increase for employees still on the step scale, 3 elections, so providing the staff needed to facilitate 3 elections next year at 7 precincts, 2 police officers, and then the recommendations from the comp study. Debt levy increasing 24% or 308,000 to cover our principal and interest payments in 2024, and then capital levy increasing 195,000 or 17% to cover most of the items from our financial management plan that I spoke of earlier. The positives for our levy is the one-time public safety aid of 854,000 from this past legislative session, along with local government aid reappropriation for an additional 327,000 or 71%. We'll also be leveraging the Community Economic Development Fund to mitigate our levy in our general fund. It's a very underutilized fund, and we're using it to cover a portion of salaries and dues to a few local organizations. Tax capacity, so that's the aggregate of all the parcels within the city, adjusted for homestead, tax increment, etc. 2023, it was 22.2 million. In 2024, it's 24.3 million, so an increase of 9.6%. More along the lines of what we've seen historically. 2023 obviously being the anomaly due to external market factors. So when we take the levy of 10.1 million divided by the tax capacity, we get to 41.5%. The 41.5% proposed in 2024 is the same percent as in 2023, so we see a 0% tax rate increase or flat tax year over year, which aligns with our financial policies. I'd also like to highlight our budget book that's available on our website that's accessible to everybody. Does a really good job of tying our levy, long-term financial planning, policy goals into a very easy to navigate and understand budget to promote transparency with all of our stakeholders. This is how we compare to other cities like-sized within our area. So Sartell, Sauk Rapids, Waite Park, St. Cloud, St. Joseph. We're looking at tax rates over the period of 2016 to 2023. We're the dark blue line on the bottom there, very consistent around that 40-41%, which can be attributed to long-term planning and sufficient reserves, and the plan is to obviously keep it at that level with our new financial policies that we adopted. Next steps would be to open the public hearing for any comments on the 2024 budget and levy, and then make a motion to adopt the budget and levy. So I can take questions at this point, or if we want to wait until after the public hearing, whichever you prefer.
Council, what questions do we have before we open the public hearing? Jill?
Rob, I know we've probably all gotten emails over the weekend with people trying to understand when there's a 0% tax increase, but they're getting their property estimate tax in the mail and it's higher. Can you just walk through how that all plays out? So provide some clarification for folks.
Yeah, so the tax rate of 41.5% is applied to your taxable market value on a home or business. And it's 41.5% in 2024 proposed, and 41.5% in 2023 proposed. So if your market value were to remain the same year over year, you'd be billed the same amount from the city of Sartell. But if you were to increase your market value from 2023 to 2024, it's still going to be at that 41.5%. So naturally, it would increase along with market value.
Thanks.
Any other questions before we open the public hearing? Okay, we'll open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to testify on the 2024 final levy, please step forward. Yeah, step forward.
I don't care.
Please state your name, address for the record.
Sure. Peter Wilson, 1108 Celebration Drive, Sartell, Minnesota, 56377. Since this is, I have the wonderful opportunity of being here on the night where this is brought up, I make a recommendation that any and all United Nations programs, that includes the Green Steps, Welcoming Cities, and anything to do with that, are removed from the budget, regardless of any funding or other programs that are in motion. After all, I think when you were sworn in, it's been a few years since I was sworn in last, but I recall being sworn in to protect and defend the Constitution. I'm not sure exactly how it goes now, but if that is the case, I don't think you were sworn in to protect the United Nations and defend it. If so, we should remove all of these items from our system and the budget. And now, that being said, I oppose all of these, and the reason, but you can legally create your own methods of doing the same ridiculous, foolish things without the United Nations guidelines. So remove them, I'll be happy. Keep them, I won't. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify? Again,
My
just name and address. Thank you.
It's Tim Megarian at 1415 Bear Path Court in Sartell. So, I'm really just here. This is just my second meeting. I went to the county one about a week or so ago, kind of getting involved in the tax part. And just asking people to go home tonight, whether we pass the levy or not. I'm sure we will. I just want you to think about a few points I'm just going to make. Okay, that's all I want. And some of it's going to be tongue in cheek, kind of laugh a little bit. But so the tax rate's flat. Jill, you already brought it up. Tax rate's flat, but why am I here? Because I care. I want to get involved. And 12.2% higher. So the first thing that comes to my mind: what are we doing with that money? There's a difference. I didn't vote for that. Okay. I voted for, certain levies with the school, county has their budget, and et cetera, but I didn't vote for that. It's almost like taxation without representation, in a way, if you think about that. So when I own a home, I live in it. I'd like to think I own it, but I don't. I rent it. Back when I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, back then we had government class. And this is the part, you can kind of laugh a little bit, but in government class, I remember, we had the United States in one column, the Soviet Union in the other. And my government teacher listed the differences between us. And one of the things that stuck up my mind was, look at that, Soviet Union, you can't own property. You can't own property. In America, you can. It was one of the greatest privileges that we had, next to voting, okay? What have we turned into? And I know you guys have to do this by mandate by the state. The state says we have to collect property taxes to run the city, the county, and the schools. But what I want people to think about is maybe go home and say, can we put a limit on this, okay? To where if my home that I want to live in Sartell, I want to stay in Sartell, I don't want to keep paying 12% more every year just because someone says my house is worth more than it is, but I don't want to sell it. So I can't capitalize on that, okay? And let's say I live here another 10 years and 8 more years, it's way up there, market crash, I go to sell my home, I just paid all those taxes without voting for them, okay? And I just lost out. And there's a lot of people that don't pay taxes. And I don't get those kind of credits. Can I afford the little bit of the increase? Well, I think it's a lot. It is a lot. 12.2% is a big part. Is it gonna break me? No. But do I think it's right? Absolutely not. Do I think it's fair? Absolutely not. I rent my home. If I don't pay this, my home is taken away from me. So we just need to stop and think about that. I mean, I'm gonna try and work with state, been reaching out to other representatives, because I think this needs to change at the state level, but at the city, we really do need to think about our budgets. And even though the tax rate's the same, I'm paying a lot more. And I love living in Sartell. I think we have a great community here. I'm so proud of the interactions that I've had, with the water part. I've been labeled the Ditch 13 guy just now. But it's getting control of the budgets, stopping the tie to our property and value to make budgets. So the question for you, Rob, is if it wasn't for me paying more, would the tax rate have to go up? Or would we have reined in our spending? And that's an important question. Are you able to answer that? Can we do that in a public forum? Or?
Through a public forum, we won't, but we can ask that on your behalf.
Okay, and I just want to kind of know that. So with all that, I'm probably just going to leave it at that. And a couple last points. Let's not try and keep up with the Joneses, because sometimes we lose. When I went to the county meeting, I kind of felt like when I saw the presentation, it just became numbers, and I could see we were just getting desensitized to what we're doing with millions of dollars, and there's individuals who are having a hard time. I'm fortunate in my life to be able to afford some unexpected changes. There's a lot of people that can't. And I'm not for socialism. I believe capitalism drives this country. It teaches people to be able to survive and be independent, and that's what we need to teach people, not just hand out money, not just buy things, and with taxes and raising taxes on those that can afford it, to just keep giving money out the door. So as you come up with these budgets, I just ask you guys think about that, and just think about owning your home without having to worry about it getting taken away. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify? Second call, anyone wishing to testify? And third and final call, anyone wishing to testify on the 2024 final levy? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Council, heard some testimony. What questions do we have for staff before we get into deliberation?
I guess one comment I would make to our speaker's point is obviously with the, if you want to go up flat tax rate, there is that increase, but I just want to be transparent that we at workshops and other council meetings have that discussion about approaching our tax levy, because we know there's going to be those increases outside of here. So we are mindful of that. And I think our speakers, both of them, make valid points to how we need to approach as a city, and make sure we look at it through the entire picture versus just through a microscope of just Sartell itself. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that as we go through this process, as Rob and everyone goes through the process, we do make sure that we look at factors outside of just the 0% that we pass through council.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think obviously there's been a lot of families in the economy in the last couple of years that have started to feel a lot of the things in inflation that has been happening, and I'm proud that we were able to stay at a 0% tax rate. I love that we implemented a strategic plan this year, a capital spending plan this year, financial policy. We committed to lowering our debt. But Tim, I think you bring up a good point from, it also is a growth rate. It's still an increase and appreciation. We also have the flip side of that. If we ever see depreciation, I think you brought that up, which will also put more pressure on our budget. So, my first year here, I feel like we've made a lot of good strides there. I think you bring up a good point. Like, our challenge moving forward will be spending as we continue to go into a potential where houses won't continue to raise as they do today. And so, very conscious about that. And to Alex's point, we talk a lot about that in workshop, and I know that even though it's 0%, it's still an increase because our property values have gone up, and we don't see that in our pockets at the same time as the tax goes up. So I appreciated your comments, and know that I think we're pretty vigilant on having that conversation. We understand, and I think our challenge for us, moving forward is really on the spending side, and maybe even being even a little bit more aggressive on some of our debt lowering as we continue to move forward, so.
Yeah, I'd follow that up. All great points, Tim. A conversation my wife and I had as we see our taxes, and oddly enough, being one of 5 that has an impact on that, is what's that mean for our budget? I think in a lot of cases, it's cash flow for people in the decisions we're making here. I agree, it is a long-term investment, and I think one of our roles, I personally feel one of our roles as a council is to ensure that your investment in Sartell and a property owner is appreciating, right? And that the work we're doing helps that investment grow. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't strap in a cash flow perspective the annual property taxes? One of the challenges that I've learned to work through with Rob's guidance is not solely looking at it in a 1 year. Some of the challenge that we have, and I know Rob lives it daily, is how do we look at that and what does our tax rate today do to us over the long run in a 4-year CAGR, if you will. In historic years, we would increase, as you can see 2021 on here, we increased 1.1% to try and drive down future increases and have a level. And I think outside of the very odd high inflation, high value increases, Sartell's done a phenomenal job of having level tax rate, which compared to our neighbors, and Rob, if you could pull that graph up, thank you. I look at some of our neighbors on here, and the variable tax rate that they would see year over year, to me, isn't being a steward of the city finances either. And so it's a balancing act of how do we manage this year while also managing the future. And then my last point I would make is that we're coming, and it seems like we always say this, we're coming out of a COVID year. But every community in the state of Minnesota, every community in the nation had a lot of money thrown into it. And I think a lot of budgets did balloon, and our staff's been working hard to rein that in. Our council during that time was also very pointed in any of that federal stimulus money. We weren't spending on reoccurring or buying reoccurring expenses. It was treated as a one-time investment of cash, investment of capital that we were able to leverage. But I think, as others have stated, we continue to have work to do to drive that down so that Sartell can be a place for all, and all can afford to live here. Because I know we've all gotten emails that our taxes are driving residents out of Sartell, and that is concerning.
I want to retire.
Yeah.
But there's a point.
Yeah, understood.
I just want to jump in and add one more thing to Ryan. If as I saw, we obviously had 0% and we had a growth rate last year as well. And this year, one thing that I didn't know prior to jumping into the council was kind of some of the things he was just talking about of, a lot of the money that where it's being used are non-reoccurring that aren't going to put a lot of pressure on our budget, where they're into reserves and some of the things that will help us into some of the street funds and some of the things that, didn't have reserves prior to that. And so some of that money will ultimately come back to us in the future if we do see the economy continue to go in that direction too. So that's another positive that I would say that, in my year on council that I've learned of a lot of that is bolstering into kind of future needs that won't put a lot of pressure on future budgets and should give us some flexibility as well.
And Rob graciously supplied me after sent a request this morning to get, I don't know what we call it, Rob, but it's a detailed list of every fund. And I take that and I throw different columns into it to understand what funds are moving. And I feel like we need to do that to be a steward of that money, to understand the fund movement, not just year to year, but over the last 2 years is really what I like to look at. And so, making sure that it didn't raise by a little bit last year and a little bit more, like what is our overall in a 2-year, how much have we adjusted these funds? I'm happy to say that, and I don't know the exact number, maybe you do off your head, Rob, but a significant amount of our budget is public safety. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't think my fellow council members would. There's a cost to that. There's a cost for us to ensure that our community remains safe. But there's others in the budget that we absolutely continue to look at and evaluate, and I'll even say critique at times, but council, are there any questions on the budget? All right, if the absence of questions, I would take a motion. Motion to approve the budget as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. On to old business, we have ditch 13 final plans and specs. April?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Rob will get up the PowerPoint. Happy to give an update on the Ditch 13 improvements in Grizzly Lane flood mitigation project tonight. Two things that we'll be asking for approval or input on from council tonight, and I want to explain it up front a little bit. We have two phases of kind of flood mitigation improvements. The second phase has multiple alternatives. So I'll get into that in a little bit. So over the past several years, the city has seen multiple rain events and snowmelt events that have caused significant flooding in the Grizzly Lane area. Because of that flooding, the city has received $2.5 million in state funds to complete a flood mitigation project for that area. This is just a picture of the drainage area that we're dealing with here. It's 5,800 acres, which is one of the challenges of this drainage area, just in the sheer amount of runoff that comes to that Grizzly Lane area currently. A little bit of background, so in 2022, the city completed a watershed study. The recommendation from that study was to increase the capacity of ditch 13 where existing dual 48-inch pipes exist. That study showed that those pipes are a bottleneck for the drainage in that area. So when you get those significant large rain events and snowmelt events, the water level rises, it overtops the roads and ultimately floods a number of homes in that area. So increasing the capacity of those existing pipes, adding a new box culvert under 13th Avenue North, and then also doing some improvements to help stabilize the ditch 13 downstream between Grizzly Lane and 2.5 Street. Council reviewed this multiple times in 2023 and gave direction to approach it in a phased approach, looking first on how do we best spend that $2.5 million to get some immediate relief to the flooding issues in that area. But before completely moving forward with that project and authorizing final plans, council gave direction to do some additional modeling, do that final design of some of those aspects, but then also expand that model area upstream and downstream to have a better understanding of how that first phase project would impact other areas within this drainage area. And then also take the next step of what are potential phase 2 improvements to help mitigate some of those impacts, and then also provide additional flood mitigation for that area. I'll pause right there to see if council has any questions on any of that at this point. So I'm gonna jump into the first phase of the project. So this is the part of the project that would be funded by the $2.5 million. The aspects of it are designed. The next step would be to authorize plans and get more into specifics of exactly how the elevations tie in. But we do, and I'll go over here in a second, have the design of what size the ditch has to be, what size the culvert has to be, some of those ditch stabilization improvements. So we are proposing to replace the existing dual 48-inch pipe with an open ditch, and then also that a new box culvert under 13th Avenue North. And then because of the impacts downstream and just the ongoing erosion that has occurred and the instability of ditch 13. We would remove the sediment that has deposited in ditch 13, restore that profile back to historic conditions, and then stabilize those more critical areas that have eroded. Up on the screen is where those two dual 48-inch pipes are located, and the bottom portion of the screen is very colorful, and I typically try to like to simplify it, but it was the best way to illustrate what this initial design would be. There are thin red lines underneath the blue and green that represent the two 48-inch pipes. They are shown in the aerial photograph up above in orange. The red line is where those 48-inch pipes would be removed. The green highlight over the 48-inch pipe is where we would look to retain the existing 48-inch pipe and utilize it for capacity, but the main reason being to limit the impacts to the adjacent properties. If you're looking between 13th Avenue North and the downstream ditch 13, you can see that current 48-inch pipe on the south side is extremely close to an existing home. And so we would propose to leave that portion of that 48-inch pipe in place so that we're not negatively impacting that existing home. On the west side of 13th Avenue North, proposing to keep a section of that 48-inch culvert to limit the impacts to existing landscape and try and retain as many trees as we could. And then the blue kind of squiggly line would be where the new ditch would be proposed. The solid blue across 13th Avenue North would be where the new box culvert with a minimum size of 10 feet wide by 5 feet high. To kind of lay that on top of the aerial so you can see it from that view, similar colors, similar type of line styles as to how that proposed project would lay out in this area. We did size all of these aspects. We do yet have to lay them in and tie them into existing grades, so there may be some minor adjustments that happen during the final plan development. But from the sizing aspect, we're fairly confident that this is similar to what that final plans would look like. Any questions at this point from council on phase 1 so far?
April, do we know on the 1317 address on the left there? Obviously, by the image, it appears close to that house. Do we know roughly how close that would be yet?
I'm having a hard time seeing the house numbers.
The farthest left or west.
Oh, the farthest west?
Yep.
The easement line that is shown in a black dash line, that easement line does go over their current deck. So no, I don't know exactly how close that would get to that property yet. We have to put in the ditch cross-section and tie those grades in, so that's not something we know specifically at this time.
As you work through that design and you look, and I had the similar question, and it obviously comes out pretty far. Is that because we're maintaining the 40-inch pipe that you had to come so much closer to 1317 and maybe 1313 where, or is that whole area, not just the blue area, going to be ditch as well? Or, could that be moved up closer to the actual current 40-inch pipe?
The exact layout of the lines that are on the screen right now are not specific to where this will be. We will keep it as minimal footprint as we can. Even the 48-inch pipes showing our GIS lines, they're not the survey lines at this point. So it's really hard to tell if it's gonna be 5 feet or 20 feet from that property. That's something that'll get figured out with that developing the final plans.
And that'll come back and we'll be
That
able to
would come
review
back,
that. Okay.
yep.
What we're showing though is that, generally accurate, that green box culvert runs underground today underneath those trees, and what's proposed is we would not be disturbing those trees.
That's
side.
the goal and the intention of the design right now, yep.
Can you talk us through a little bit of the open ditch concept versus where I see the planned open ditch What's the benefit of an open ditch there versus another box culvert running?
Cost. So so currently it's 48-inch round pipe. If you look at cross-section AA on your screen, you can see the two existing 48-inch pipes, one in green that we're proposing to retain, and then the one in red that we're proposing to remove. And then the ditch section that we're proposing, and you can see the significant amount of added capacity from going from a pipe to a ditch section. We are proposing that larger 10-foot wide box culvert under 13th Avenue. To extend that box culvert, the entire length of the backyards would be substantially more expensive than grading a open channel in this area.
Okay. And is there one considered primary and the other one is overflow from, I guess as I look at the backyards, we've got the green box culvert underground in place today. Does that become primary and then once that hits capacity, things flow over, or do you try and engineer it to be equal, or help us understand that?
They're gonna be at similar elevations. We don't have a lot of elevation to work with from where the existing grades are today in the culvert. And then also just the elevation of 13th Avenue. So the primary, I anticipate they both would be used most of the time, but that's something, again, those grades and the specifics on the grades, if one's a half a foot higher than the other, that's something we need to work out as we tie those in with the final plans.
Okay. It's a pretty wet area. What do we do in the ditch area to prevent that from turning into cattails 2 years from now?
Over time, I would anticipate that this section of ditch along ditch 13 would look very similar to the upstream ditch and the downstream ditch.
Okay.
So I understand right now it's nicely manicured mowed yards, but it will be a open channel ditch moving forward, just like upstream and downstream of this location.
Council, any other questions at this point?
Okay. So that's one aspect of phase one, or the 2.5 million project that we're moving forward with. The other aspect of that phase one is the stabilization of ditch 13. So shown on the far right is the red line showing the ditch location from Grizzly Lane south all the way down to 2.5 Street, and then a couple pictures along that ditch. So we have done 2 site visits this fall. We were out there looking at the erosion, measuring distances, observing soil types, really doing extensive site investigations to be able to determine the best design and the best way to approach stabilizing this ditch. Couple item of note, on the far left, you can see the erosion along the root line of the trees, but then in the middle of the ditch, you can see the sediment. There were a lot of areas the first time we were out there where the ditch was actually dry, and then it would get wet, and then it would get dry again, which is an indication that that profile goes up and down and isn't a efficient straight line. When we did the survey and cross sections of the ditch, that's exactly what we found. So this is the profile of ditch 13. The 2 spikes you see, one is 2.5 Street, one is 5th Street, and then the yellow spike low, that's where the existing 48-inch pipes come into the ditch. The black profile on the bottom is the historic profile. So based off of LiDAR, we were able to get a profile of what that ditch used to look like. So that this maps the bottom of the ditch and the elevations of the bottom of the ditch compared to what we surveyed this fall for a ditch profile. As you can see, that yellow line is very jagged and has increased in elevation significantly through this stretch, anywhere from 1/2 foot to 2 feet of depth of sediment located in the ditch. In entering that information into the model, It showed significant improvement for the efficiency of the ditch and the drainage in the area to remove that sediment and restore that profile back to as close as possible historic conditions. So up on your screen, we added in a blue line, which is what we are proposing to regrade the ditch profile to, making it more efficient and really improving the drainage, helping with the flood mitigation. But because the ditch is more efficient, you don't have areas that kind of spin or become turbulent, which will help reduce the erosion along this ditch as well. Any questions on that?
April, do you know when that ditch was originally put in place? How long it took to erode to the point it is?
I don't know when that ditch was originally created, but the historic profile was based off of LiDAR from 2010 and 2011.
And we do ditch maintenance, right?
We do some ditch maintenance. Public Works went in and cleared out a lot of the trees and stuff that was causing issues, but to my knowledge, we haven't gone in to do ditch dredging minus ditch 16 on the south end of town a number of years ago.
Of actual dredging, no, that's the only one we've
That's
dredged.
the only one. Council did authorize 2 or 3 years ago a ditch study, which looked at all the ditches, did a survey and prioritized those ditches and the need for maintenance on them. So this would be the first one we would be tackling with part of that ditch plan.
Do you think, given the evolution of the current ditch, it's something we're gonna have to monitor more closely than, I guess there's engineering ways you determine?
Completing this project will help significantly in stabilizing. The next step of this will be to stabilize some of those eroded areas. Once the vegetation's gone and it's pretty granular soils, it just continues to erode. So if we can go in and restabilize some of those, that'll help. I think just the sheer intensity of the rainfall events we had washed a lot of sediment down and eroded a lot of stuff. So I think that when you have significant storms like that, it is important to go back out and inspect and monitor the ditches.
Great, thanks.
April, if I'm reading this right, your intent is to take it down maybe a foot at most, maybe 1.5 feet at the most, down to a couple inches in spots, is that?
A couple inches, I think there's that one spike between 2nd and 1/2 and 5th Street, which is about 2 feet, is what we would take out.
Okay. And are we restricted, sorry,
No, that's fine.
are we restricted to the historic profile from other, I guess, agencies? Or is that just where we need to be to create the best flow?
I would say both. We are limited from a permitting perspective. We're allowed to go in and restore and stabilize. We're not necessarily able to go in without significantly more permitting to increase capacity without doing a much higher level study and permitting process. So the intent of this project, knowing that we have the money available and we want to do something sooner rather than later to help the homes that have been flooded, is to restore and getting back to that historic profile from what we're seeing in the models is that it's sufficient. It's what we need to be at.
And when you say sufficient, that, I don't know what that means. That's not to take a 100-year flood or rain event, but sufficient to,
So all of that's a good question, thank you, Mayor Fitzum. All the data we're showing is based off the June 2022 rain event that occurred, which is a more intense rain event than a standard 100-year rain event that we would design to. So generally in this situation, if you didn't have a specific rain event to design to, it would be that 100-year event. Because we are fortunate to have that data and able to calibrate the model to what we actually saw during that event, all the data is based on that 2022 event. It also helps provide, I think, some confidence in just knowing that we're seeing more frequent and more intense rain events. It's what we're actually seeing, so we're able to model that.
perfect, thank you.
Adding a couple of dashed lines to these results on top, which is then the peak water elevation from that June 2022 event. The yellow dash line corresponds to the existing profile today with all the jagged lines. You can see both just downstream and upstream of Fifth Street, that existing profile, if you were to get that rain event again, is quite a bit higher. In dredging out that sediment that has accumulated, you lower that peak water elevation, both just downstream and then upstream of Fifth Street. You will note there is a slight increase as you get towards Second and Half Street, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other thing I want to touch on, and I've got a couple more visuals on this, but that the existing profile, which is the yellow one, what's out there today, and that jump we have between Second and a Half and Fifth Street, that's occurring because there's a pinch point in in the ditch currently. The profile goes up at that location, it gets narrow at that location, which is why we're seeing that rise in both the sediment accumulation and the peak water elevation. So one of the things we want to do with this project is go in and widen that portion of the channel back out. We're not quite certain why it narrowed in that location, but it's significantly more narrow than the rest of it. So we want to regrade that channel so that it matches the rest of the ditch. The picture on the screen, so on the left side is the existing conditions model. I've got circled in red that narrowing in the channel. This is modeling velocities through the channel. You can see it, there's a lot of red and orange, and so the velocity in that location gets quite a bit faster through that portion of the channel because it's got to push itself through that narrowing in the channel. The image off to the right is the proposed conditions, meaning with the upstream ditch and culvert, and then also the profile changes along ditch 13. That same location, velocities go way down. I did circle a couple other areas where velocity increases just slightly. Those happen to correspond with the locations that we want to do some more significant erosion protection and stabilization of the banks. Any questions on any of that information?
Yeah, maybe just a few here. The maps are done for modeling, and so if I'm comparing the two, on the right I see what ideal state or proposed new conditions would be, and it looks like we won't flood out south of Grizzly, west of 13th Avenue,
So
based on the model.
I'm gonna get to those images next. This is strictly modeling velocity and
Okay.
not elevation. So
All right.
let's,
I'll hold in.
I'll get there in a second. Can I do this slide first?
Yep.
So this is a phase one ditch stabilization improvements. On top, we're showing core logs along, we're proposing that along most of the ditch channel to help protect that toe, which is that erosion you're seeing by the tree roots. And then the image, the drawing below, is a combination of different other tools we will use in those more significant eroded areas, which will be a combination of riprap, gabions, soil field logs, just to give you an idea of the different types of treatments and erosion protection that we'll see when we bring back final plans. But then Mayor Fitzum, to get to your question, this is the flood impacts modeled kind of in that same existing conditions on the left and proposed conditions on the right. The yellow that you see on the proposed conditions on the right is the flood impacts from existing conditions so that you can easily compare the improvement from one scenario to the other.
Maybe said in my terms, yellow in an ideal state matching the design, yellow would disappear.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Another way to look at this, again, this gets a little busy and I'm gonna zoom in on one of these. Another way to look at this is the depth of the drainage in the area. The existing conditions, a little hard to see, but there are actually 8 points within this entire drainage area that correspond to the table in the middle for the location. And then you've got the existing conditions, peak flood elevation in the middle column, and then the phase one elevation difference. So after implementing the proposed phase one projects, you can see at those different points a reduction in every single location except for 0.6 and 0.8, which corresponds to the orange on the phase one conditions map, which is at ditch 13 close to 2nd and a half Street, and then also the intersection of 2nd and a half Street and Pinecone. No surprise here. The graph I showed earlier showed that slight increase in elevation near 2nd and a half Street. And we've talked previously about that downstream impact and potential increase at the intersection of 2nd and a half and Pinecone. And then here's just kind of zoomed in on those two locations. The increase along ditch 13 at 2nd and a half, or near 2nd and a half, those homes are higher in elevation, so that would not negatively impact or flood out any of those structures. So we were tasked with expanding the assessment area to identify the downstream and upstream impacts, to have that better understanding. These are the two locations that came out. So as we continue on, kind of the next thing I want to talk about is that future phase two project and different alternatives to mitigate this. But I want you to be aware that with the $2.5 million in doing the phase one project, there's a chance that these two areas, if you got that same event, would increase in elevation slightly, but not detrimental to any structures. City has continued to manage the flooding that occurs at 2.5 and Pinecone with sandbags and other measures. You would do the same as you are doing now to manage those impacts with that type of rain event currently.
Can you walk us through that a little bit more? From what I'm seeing, and because I'm not an engineer, we're bringing water faster to where we are tonight, City Hall property, right?
Correct.
This seems historically as the pinch point, crossing underneath Pinecone and continuing the creek down. As we there's many nights I know that I had been on the phone with Chief Kudrowski, that we were at the height of the bridge, underneath the bridge on County Road 1. So we were flowing as much water as we could east of Pinecone. Now we're gonna bring water faster here. From a public safety, my mind just goes to Pinecone. That is a critical area for us to protect. And I know historically, we've done a great job of protecting it, but how do we get confidence that we're not gonna flood out Pinecone by bringing more water faster here?
With this project, you will be bringing more water faster to this location. The amount is a few tenths according to the model and what we're doing here. So it's not like you're going to be raising the elevation in that intersection by 1/2 foot or 1 foot.
Okay.
But you are increasing it. And that is then why, I'm gonna keep going here, there's
Yep.
a lot to digest. Why we're looking at that phase two project, that future phase two project to mitigate those impacts. And maybe I'll keep going. So these are the phase two solutions that we modeled. And I'm gonna switch now, instead of calling them phases, I'm gonna switch to alternatives, okay? Alternative one for phase two is shown on the north end of the drainage area. One we've talked about before, and that's routing some of that drainage north into an existing 60-inch pipe on the north end of town that discharges to the Mississippi River. We show 2 green lines up there. It's one or the other. One route goes from Baker's Lake north through open farmland, which is the historic one we've seen. We also modeled a second location that would follow the future 15th Street North corridor and then run north along Pinecone. So that's one alternative we modeled. Second alternative we modeled is shown in purple on your screen. It adds storage near that future 15th Street North location, reroutes part of the drainage slightly to the east and dumps it back into ditch 13, bypassing the Grizzly Lane area where we're currently having flooding issues. This improves that downstream impact because of the additional storage in that area. Alternative 3 would be a second outlet from that Grizzly area to the south under Grizzly Lane, creating some additional storage in an existing wetland complex, and then routing that drainage back into ditch 13 further south along that ditch corridor. And the alternative 4 that we looked at is increasing the capacity under Pinecone Road. In this scenario, we modeled pretty much an open ditch flow, so it's like a very large box culvert or a span bridge at that location to see what that impact would be. So I'll go through each of these hopefully very quickly and just kind of the results of them. So alternative 1 is routing north to that existing 60-inch pipe. Similar maps that we've seen before, same points. The table's probably the easiest to read, and so we've got the existing peak flood elevations, kept the phase 1 elevation difference, which is showing the rises at 0.6 and 0.8, and then alternative 1 results. So you can see at 0.2, which is in that Grizzly Lane area, by completing phase 1, we're estimating a 1.5 foot drop in water elevation in that location. By then adding this second phase in the future, you could increase that up to a 2.5 foot drop in water elevation at that location. And then you can see 0.6 and 0.8, which phase 1 would increase. This alternative would decrease the water elevation in those locations. Alternative, and jump in if you have any questions, but alternative 2 is the additional storage along 15th Street North and rerouting to discharge into a different location along ditch 13. Again, similar maps, similar results, and it helps that Grizzly Lane area again, just over 2 feet versus the 1.5 foot that we're anticipating with phase 1. And then it essentially mitigates the increase at 0.6 and 0.8. It doesn't reduce it a whole lot more, if anything. So the increase that you would see in phase 1, we're anticipating this alternative would just mitigate that versus improve it anymore. Phase or alternate 3, rerouting south into the existing wetland complex and rerouting back in downstream. You can see the table here. Not a whole lot of change between phase 1 and alternative 3 in the Grizzly Lane area. 0.6, which is close to 2nd and Half Street, no change there. So essentially this is not a recommended alternative, but wanted to share the results with you. And then alternative 4 is increasing the capacity of the downstream culvert at Pinecone Road. It doesn't have an impact or any additional impact on the Grizzly Lane area. Again, about a 1.5 foot drop in water elevation there. It does help by 2nd and Half Street in mitigating and reducing the water elevation there. Also at the intersection of Pinecone and 2nd and Half Street. However, I want to direct your attention to the bottom of the screen on the figure on the right. It is showing, so the blue is where water levels are being reduced from existing conditions, and the orange is showing where the water level increases from existing conditions. As you can see, by increasing the capacity of that culvert, you are significantly dropping the water elevation on one side and increasing it on the other. So in order to do that improvement, there would be substantial permitting because it is Watab River, and additional modeling, and it's not an alternative that we would recommend for a future phase 2. However, it is an alternative that we would recommend looking at if and when Pinecone gets reconstructed, and going through that permitting process with that road. But we're not recommending this one because you don't have that additional improvement in the Grizzly Lane area with alternative 1 or alternative 2. Again, these were the alternative two solutions. We did look at a hybrid of alternative one and alternative two. The graph you see up top with the red and blue lines is the flow through the existing 60-inch pipe on the north end of town that we would be tying into with alternative one. The red line is what would happen today with that June 2022 event. And then if you were to reroute Baker's Lake or portion of Baker's Lake into that pipe, essentially because of the timing of those flows coming into that pipe, you see that initial spike and no change in that, but you see a second spike on the blue that stays at that level for quite a while. The pipe can handle that event. Where it could be an issue is if you received multiple rain events in a row, because a lot of the flow in the pipe after that spike comes through, goes back down, the pipe has capacity again to take the next storm. Because it's such a big drainage area and it takes a long time for that to drain down, you have the capacity of that pipe used up for a longer period of time. To help mitigate that, we looked at this alternative 5, which includes additional ponding along 15th Street North as well as that rerouting to the north to help attenuate that double spike in the capacity of that pipe. Any questions on that? So here's the alternative 5 results with the added capacity storage and then the rerouting to the north. Again, you get that additional flood mitigation in the Grizzly Lane area. You drop that water elevation at 2nd and a Half and Pinecone, and then you mitigate that concern with using the capacity of that pipe up for an extended period of time. I'm gonna stop there. Lots of information. Any other questions council have at this point?
Did we give any consideration to the, we've got an easement running from Providence, area, all the way north? Any, does it make sense to run it on that easement, which is already existing, versus trying to bring it on 15th Street or propose future 15th Street?
You're talking about the easement that's in place for the existing water main and sanitary sewer that runs there. We didn't look at that routing, but you know, this is the preliminary stage of this kind of phase 2 future. If that's a route that we want to consider, it's absolutely one we can consider in the future. You still would have to get easement from that location to the east, to the 60-inch pipe. But yeah, that's absolutely an alignment we could consider if that's one council would like us to in the future. Again, tonight we're looking kind of 2 steps on that phase 1 authorization to move forward with final plans for that specific project, but wanted to present what we're seeing and kind of that impacts downstream, upstream, and potential solutions for a phase 2 in the future. So there's a lot more detailed modeling that would need to go into place with these different alternatives. Am asking for some direction on preference of these different alternatives, just because that's helpful then to try and secure funding and go after different grant opportunities and identify those in the future. So any other questions, I guess? I'll stop there again.
Now let's maybe break it down for council here. Phase 1, which is funded today. Any questions or considerations on that?
Just a question for the homeowners who are in who we saw the visual of, who will be directly impacted by phase 1. Have they received any direct communication yet regarding this or a projected timeline?
So we've met with residents and had open houses a couple times over the past year. We did send out a letter letting them know that we were presenting this information at council tonight. And so then if authorization is given to move forward with final plans, we would reach out and provide more information to them.
Okay, perfect.
Good question. I know that's one, I think all of councils receive feedback of, until we can get to the planning stage and actually design it as he talked about on the screen tonight, it should go there, but we're not exactly sure, and I think that's where everyone wants to get to, is how do we know exactly what's gonna go there? And some of the options, right?
And we notify not just those in the Grizzly Lane area, but everybody along ditch 13 that would be impacted as well received that letter that this was being presented tonight.
Thank you.
Have we had responses from some of those letters and just the overall sentiment from that group? And, obviously this council's been, faced with, do we try to go with a big project? Do we take this in phases? And, our conversation prior was, immediate relief for Grizzly Lane neighbors is needed. Right? We have to do something. We've had that for 2 years now. And it's been pretty bad. So what has been the overall kind of response, or have you gotten any?
Yeah, we've been getting phone calls and feedback from residents. I mean, not just in the last 6 months, but over the last couple years. Residents have been really good to work with. Obviously, they're frustrated on a number of items. Hearing a lot from the residents along Grizzly and just how that is gonna impact their property. A significant number along ditch 13 too, just helping us identify some of those really bad erosion areas and just kinda curious as to where we're going. But we've been trying to be super transparent with them, hold the open houses, communicate with them, residents as much as we can. So as we continue to move forward, we'll keep them informed on the different steps.
Anything else on phase one? Phase two, the different alternates. And one call that I know there was, people in the audience trying to get pictures. All of these are available on our website under the council packet if you wanted it more detailed versus trying to take pictures. But council, I like the I'd prefer to move the water north and get it to a different area, if you will. I'd say for the last 2 years, my mind's been on how do we increase the flow out of here and get it to the river. But we run into further constraints downstream on that side of it. I think most of us also recognize that we're limited right now until 19th goes to 15th Street. Shutting down either Pine Cone or County Road 1 has significant impact for us. And so for those reasons, I would definitely look for, I like alternate 5, the combination of the two. And I guess my preference would be to try and get it to a different spot in the community. If we can get it to that 60-inch pipe that goes out to the Mississippi, even better.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think going north has the most options for just an open field or tie-in routes. April, I'm not looking for exact figures, but do you have the options 1 through 4 on, okay, one significantly more than other, or they all be close to the same, or any budget kind of preliminary?
Yeah, cost impacts. So that's something we haven't looked at yet, but we still plan to do. So we wanted to first look at what, from a modeling standpoint, had the most benefit. But yeah, absolutely, that's the next step, and we're gonna have to do that in order to try and secure any grant funding. So once we have that information, we can bring it back and review that with council.
Rob, do we have, I know we talked about doing this in phases. Phase 1 is paid for. Subsequent phases, do we have anything in the capital improvement plan?
No, not currently.
Okay.
No, nothing built in.
This appears to be a huge undertaking.
So, I mean, we do have preliminary cost estimates from that 2022 study that was done a couple of years ago for routing to the north. It didn't include the storage and some other things, and we were around that $5 to $7 million to route a pipe to the north. I think there's some cost piggybacking you can do, or savings, if you will, and that's why we looked at the 15th Street North corridor. If you can utilize some of that pipe on those small events for that local drainage along the roadway, and then utilize it for the larger events, the timing of that's different, so that can work with the capacity of the pipe. Also, the storage along 15th Street North, again, using that both for storage of this to help out, but then also treatment and storage for 15th Street North, which is why we looked at that corridor. But open to direction council would like to go.
And something else to add too, I think the timing of this is extremely beneficial because we have our utility rate study that will be kicking off in May. So understanding costs for each phases and council's appetite for each different design, we could build that into our spreadsheet and show how that might affect rates over time. So I think they could work cohesively together.
Just with the number of large events and intensity of events occurring all over the state and country, there are more grant opportunities for planning projects. And so one option is to try and secure funds to further dive into what this phase 2 solution could look like and what that design would look like and how, that would really impact the area. So that could be kind of that next step in that phase 2 approach.
As you've looked through these alternatives, has anyone jumped out at you and your team as to be kind of the direction that you see? I also am a fan of doing something north on top of phase 1 so that we can get that water out to the Mississippi north of town. But
Yeah, our recommendation is the alternative 5, the combining kind of 1 and 2. For the purpose of you are adding additional flood mitigation benefit to that Grizzly Lane area. You are mitigating and reducing the flood water levels we're seeing along 2nd and a half and Pinecone. So we would be in agreement with what council's seeing. With that kind of next steps, if authorized tonight, we would move forward with final plans of phase 1. And then we would bring those plans back to council for approval and authorized to bid. And then the construction of phase 1, kind of the timing of that. The final plans would be done over the next several months. Would be looking to hopefully bid the plans in spring with construction in 2024, likely to start June or July of 2024 and go into the fall. There is an asterisk on that, and we have met with the permitting agencies about the project, but their process seems to take longer and longer every year, and so the permitting process would ultimately determine how fast that project could move forward. We're still hopeful with, if we're able to move forward with final plans tonight, to still get it constructed in 2024, but just want to be upfront that that schedule might be out of our control a little bit. So that's kind of the schedule shown in blue up on the screen, and then the phase 2 shown in green. Again, next step would be secure funding for design and construction and complete that design and construction. And again, that's somewhat of a guess in when those funds would be available, but just kind of taking a stab at what that might look like. And also paired it a little bit with that 15th Street North construction, if that's a route the council would want to go.
In April, who is it that would constrain us on permitting? Who has to permit this?
The DNR and the Corps of Engineers. So we would need 2 different permits from the Minnesota Department, the DNR, and then a permit from the Corps.
Council, any questions? The ask before us tonight is for ditch 13 final plans and specs, approval of final plans, specs and bidding. I would take a motion on that.
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Discussion? April, one thing, and I know we've touched on it, would love to see we maintain as much of the landscape, and I think you heard council share that. And then the second thing is there's a lot of studies in here, and I think we need to be careful. I get excited when I see alternate 5 and what it could do. That's 5+ years out, in my opinion, just based on a funding. And so I think we need to be super careful as we communicate to the community of what do we anticipate phase 1 doing, and don't don't show that rose-colored view of what alternate 5 could bring us. We are gonna have another rain event. Things are gonna flood. And I just don't want to confuse the community of what this phase 1 is gonna achieve. Is that fair, council?
I agree, and even as we pull together the technical memos to present this information, we're doing it as 2 separate memos.
Okay.
One for phase 1 and then one for kind of those impacts in phase 2, so hopefully that clarifies, but I agree with that point, Mayor Fitzum, and we'll make sure we try and clarify that as much as we can.
I would just echo just again, kind of something I said and what you said is, you know, that's been a lot of the work that we've done over the last 6 months of, you know, the time and the scale of this project and how complex it is. And going back to the spending conversation that we had earlier on the budget and some of that but, you know, really this council, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the sentiment really was, we have to help these neighbors today with something. And then we have to look at a longer term solution to the best of our ability. And so I just wanted to give more context to that, to the community, as I don't think they maybe have watched all of those conversations that we've had along this path here, so.
Council, we have a motion and a second. Seeing no more discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. On to pond dredging plans and authorization.
It is just a fun stormwater night tonight. Mayor, members of the council, for your consideration tonight is the approval of plans and authorization to solicit quotes for pond dredging project. So in 2019 and 2020, the city completed an assessment of all of the ponds within the city. And we took some sonar readings of the sediment levels in all of the ponds, and we developed a prioritization list for maintenance on those ponds. Your screen is a map of all those different ponds. The 5 different ponds highlighted in red are the 5 that rose to the top on that priority list. And so over the next several years, the city has budgeted in their capital improvement plan to dredge out a pond every other year. So the first pond that would be looking at dredging is Pond 64, which is located in the Avalon development. Kind of a better location of where that is located. What's up on your screen right now is the sonar data from the sediment levels in the pond. This is a 2-cell pond. South is off to your left. That pond was dredged out, or that cell of the pond was dredged out a number of years ago. But this pond continues to cause issues in this area, has significant odor. And so we're coming back to dredge the other cell. That red area and yellow area represents 4 to 5 feet of sediment that has accumulated in that pond cell. So it'd be looking to come in and remove that sediment in the north cell. Also go in and get whatever sediment has also accumulated in that a half a foot to a foot in that kind of purple blue area in the south cell as well.
April, make sure I'm reading this right. What we see, the depths there, represented in different colors, is the depth of sediment, not depth of the pond, correct?
It's depth of sediment under the water in the pond, correct. Yep, so on the bottom are the cross sections of the pond, so that south cell, you can see has got side slopes that are consistent and is a few feet deep. The north cell has kind of a staged cross section to it, which goes deeper, which is where a lot of that sediment has accumulated. So correct, that is not the depth of the
There's not an
pond.
island in the south one, it's just no sediment recorded there.
Correct, yep.
And 5 feet of sediment in one area compared to 2 feet everywhere else, or 1 foot everywhere else in that area, outside of human interaction in that area, like what would drive that?
That location of the pond is where the inlets come in, so that's the first spot
Gotcha.
that drainage enters the system. And then it outlets the other end, which is why there's less accumulation there as well. So these are the draft, plans. We'd come in, surround the area with silt fence to kind of contain the construction. They come in with equipment, dredge it out. We are planning to haul the sediment to the landfill property. We did sediment testing, which is a requirement from the state. It does not have to go into the landfill, but it is a material that you can use for temporary cover on the landfill, so there's a benefit to being able to utilize that sediment at the landfill location. I highlighted a couple fence encroachments. So there's one property that has fence that goes well into the drainage and utility easement in the pond area. So we'll be contacting that property owner and notifying them that we'll be removing the fence that's located there. Otherwise, fairly minimal impacts to the surrounding properties.
And from a dredging perspective, like how long did it take to get to 5 feet, and how long will this last if the inlets and outlets are gonna remain the same? What kind of time frame would this project buy us for these ponds to function correctly?
Yeah, each pond's different just because of the drainage area entering it. In general, every 15 to 25 years, you could expect to have to come in and dredge a pond. Rough estimate.
So every time we redo the roads in an area, we should do the pond. It's kind of,
How long of a project? Oh, I didn't mean to transition. Go ahead.
What's that?
I didn't mean to transition. It looked like you were gonna.
Oh, no, it's just, pond dredging is something you're gonna see a lot more communities do in the near future. A lot of ponds were built, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and, nobody's done an excellent job of budgeting for that over the years, but, communities are gonna start having to because they are reaching their useful life.
What kind of project is it? How long does it take? And, is it weeks or is it days or?
A few weeks, I would say 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
On the long end of the project.
I mean, is there any on-site storage of the material that's brought up, or is it all taken off immediately?
We did reach out to the adjacent property owner for that undeveloped area, to see if he would want to use some of that sediment because it doesn't have to be landfilled, for that area. So he was gonna take a look at how much sediment's there and kind of some things and let us know. So there is the potential to, store and spread out some of the sediment in that area, if that property owner chooses to do so. Otherwise, it will be hauled off-site.
Okay.
if I recall from past project, had been a significant cost for us is the disposal of that sediment.
Anytime you're trucking material, it increases in cost. So most communities have to haul it quite a ways, especially if they have to put it in a landfill. The opportunity to be able to use it adjacent on site and even only having to haul it within the city has substantial cost savings to the city.
Sorry, one more. Those
yeah.
are lined ponds, is that correct?
They are not lined ponds.
They're not lined ponds. Is there an opportunity as we're doing that dredging to, if this pond is 15 years old, is there an opportunity to dredge it deeper to take in more?
You could, that first cell, north cell, is at a 4-to-1 slope. You could dredge down deeper. We don't like to get to pond depths more than 8 to 10 feet, just for safety reasons and just long-term maintenance of it. So just looking at the lineal aspect of that cell, there might be the potential to go a foot or two deeper that we can look at. I'm not sure how much more depth you could get just because of the shape of it, but it's something we can take a look at and potentially increase as we work with contractors on removing the sediment.
Yeah, if we're gonna mobilize the equipment, it seems like that would be the opportune time, and I think to Jed's question of how long could this last, if we didn't have that 5-foot mark in there, we're probably not highlighting this pond, right? And so if we could dig down in that area, it might last a little longer.
Yeah,
Okay.
as long as we keep that side slope. I don't
Well,
see an
and
issue with
also
that.
with our construction, measures now, we're protecting a lot of them ponds a lot. The construction there isn't as much, so with our, catching the sediment off the roads, sweeping the roads, cleaning the roads, doing more maintenance helps immensely over the entire city.
Good call.
So looking at schedule and budget quickly, if you authorize, or if you approve plans tonight and authorize solicitation of quotes, we would solicit quotes in December, and then bring back consideration for award in January, with construction happening January, April. Depending on the contractor, some contractors might want to come in when it's frozen and winter conditions, some might want to wait till it thaws out. It just kind of depends on their practices or how they want to approach it. And then project closeout would follow after that. Total project cost summary, the sediment samples and testing, design, estimate, construction services, and then the actual sediment removal and disposal estimate. So total product cost estimated at $230,107. As I mentioned, the city has budgeted in their capital improvement plan $250,000 between 2023 and 2024 for the design and then dredging of a pond. So within the city's current budget for the project. With that, I'm happy to answer any last questions or any other questions you may have.
I think my only other question is, you know, that's the budget. This is the pond that seems to be the biggest problem. Do we have any that are close behind? And Rob, do we have other capital improvements that exist for other pond dredging as we move forward?
I can tackle. So I did highlight the 5 that rose to the top from the prioritization list. So we're on an every other year basis. So budgeted so much for design 1 year and then dredging the next, and then we'll budget again for design. And so after this pond 77, it would be the next one, and then pond 88 pond. So we do have a prioritization list and a plan moving forward to continue the maintenance on the ponds.
Council, any other questions? If not, I'll look for a motion on plans and authorizing quotes. We have a motion to approve the plans and authorize for quotes. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. We are on to department reports. Year-end reports, or closing out the year report. Public Works Engineering.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. April's tired, so I'll answer the questions if you have any. Any questions?
So what questions do we have?
It's perfect right now. We've been out a few times. We were out Saturday. I mean, of course, we haven't been out any time with a full group, so mostly all the mains. Done a little bit of pre-treating, but we haven't had to do much of that, so every day we get closer, it's to the spring is better.
Yep. Seeing no more questions, thank you. Fire.
Mayor, members of council, you have in front of you our monthly report for fire. Just wanted to echo the mayor's comments, thank our fire marshal, Butch Reland, for all the hard work he's put into the city. It's kind of one of those unrecognized, very hard to see the impact and sometimes very hard to measure the success and results of those things. Fire code's a really tricky area. Sad that we're losing him, but I'm, wish him the best of luck and everything. You look around the community, and I think one of the many reasons Sartell is the hard work he's put in over the years. It's going to be a steep learning curve for the rest of us, and we're again just can't reiterate enough how thankful we are for the hard work he's put in.
Any questions for Fire Chief? I would again echo that, and I'll remember back when you joined the team coming from St. Cloud, I should say coming from a neighboring community. You were just in awe at how well kept our commercial and multifamily were, and I would directly attribute that to our inspections and the work that's been done there. And so the challenge now is carry it forward. So appreciate that. Police.
Couple things. Mayor, members of the council, Rob, can you pull up patches? They're not as exciting as water maps, but They are pretty cool. So these are the 5 finalists of our new updated patch. We had a team from the PD that was heavily involved in trying to come up with designs, incorporating the bridge, and then a modernization of what you see on my shoulder, which is about 30 years old now. And this will be the 3rd patch that the PD has had in its existence. Of note is maybe the middle patch, which does bring back some historic value. That was the same shape as the original patch of the Sartell Police Department. So we're getting them printed, and once they come to the PD, we'll kind of go through as a team and decide where to go from that. So just wanted to share that with you guys. And then next, video to share. I'll let it play first.
My name is Kirk Gross. I work for the city of Sartell as a patrol officer. I'll be Echo's dog handler and provide for him and keep him safe. It was a special experience meeting him for the first time, and the beginnings of that bond was a special time. So obviously Echo being a dual-purpose canine, having the ability to track for missing people or detect narcotics, being able to use him as an outreach tool to bring people in and bring people together. The funds not only paid for the dog itself, but also the training for the dog and for me as well. It's a rewarding thing to be able to work with the dogs and see how they progress through training. And I'm excited to watch Echo as we grow together and how we can work together as a team to help save lives.
So that was the, has not actually been launched by Firehouse Subs yet, but that is their promo video. This is the first police canine they've ever sponsored. All the millions of dollars they've spent on public safety. They've never sponsored a police canine, so they'll have a lot of national publicity to Echo, and this was one of their first media campaigns they'll launch, and they're gonna kind of follow Echo and Officer Gross as they go through their training process. So I think this is gonna go out this week, so you'll start seeing that, and of course we'll share it as well, and should bring a lot of positive PR to the city of Sartell as they follow they send a media crew from Florida. They fly them up here every time they come up, so it's pretty cool to see. And Kurt's been sandbagging me. He didn't tell me he was such a good PR guy, but we're gonna be using him in the future more. So yeah, of note too is that he arrived today. Echo came home with Kurt today, and just meeting his family for the first time tonight too. So kind of a cool event. Lastly, to just kind of end the year out, and then my first 6 months here, I just wanted to share a little bit of personal perspective and some thank yous, starting with the community in general. Policing has become difficult. We've all seen some of the challenges over the last few years, and directly related to officer morale and health in an organization is the community and the relations, partnerships building. And I have never seen so much support for law enforcement until I came here. I'm surprised my duty belt still fits, by the way, the amount of food that gets dropped off. The Christmas cards, thank you. Much appreciated to receive that outward support, and that's such a huge piece of why we have happy officers and why we still attract so many candidates to our PDs. So never have seen that in my entire life. I still believe that I'm sitting on a gold mine as far as staff goes at the PD too. I did my research before I came here, before I decided to leave the job I was at, and it still holds true. Especially Captain Mater and Deputy Chief Schreiner, the amount of support they've given me. They went through a tough process in saying goodbye to a new chief from an outside agency, and I just wanted to take a minute to recognize their embracing of me, my vision, and trying to push things and progress to the future. They have been wonderfully supportive, and they're the reason that we have such high remarks on our PD, the stuff that they do day in, day out. The city staff have been, I was not anticipating the welcoming I got, and I know it sounds like a long drawn out thank you, but you have to bear with me. But the staff in this room have been just wonderful. Pete was checking on me on a daily basis to make sure I was doing okay, and that's kind of gone away now, but that's good, right? Like, he's let me spread my wings a little bit. So yeah, but the staff in general, whether it's in planning and public works, like, everyone has been so welcoming, making me feel like I belonged here. And I was lucky enough to come up under some really great leaders who mentored me as a young officer and then a young leader. But I do have to say, like, I've never worked for someone with the amount of energy that Anna brings to a room, the ability to not micromanage, to let me be who I am as a leader, and empower me to keep going. So thank you for doing that. It means a ton, and I wouldn't be able to do the things I'm doing without her. And then finally, the council. Every single person sitting up there has reached out to me on a personal basis, whether it's been text messages, calls, emails, giving me support throughout, making my family feel welcome here, which was not expected by any means, but it happened, and I'll get a little emotional, sorry, but it meant more to me than I can tell you guys. So thank you. I don't know if they write a book on welcoming a chief, but you guys hit the head on the nail, or the nail on the head, or whatever. Sorry, getting a little emotional. But it was really important, and I've just never expected what I got from all of you. And I think oftentimes in government, the public doesn't get to see all of these pieces behind the scenes that happen to make a city or county work, and all the work that you guys, the staff, everyone has put into welcoming me and making me, letting me have my vision for this department moving forward has been so huge, and I just cannot give you guys enough praise for that. So I'm excited for the future.
Awesome, and we're excited to see your vision continue to come to life. It's pretty awesome. Good job. Council, anything else for PD?
No, we're great. We're thankful to have you here, and the video is awesome.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
When do you envision Echo hitting the vibrant streets of Sartell?
Yeah, so he's gonna start his narcotics training right after Christmas. It sounds like, and kind of just catching up on that as the spring thaw comes, he'll start the tracking apprehension work. So for sure by summer, but probably late spring, you'll see him on the streets and active patrol and doing lots and lots of canine demos. So
I was gonna say the challenge will be don't mixing up the two canines.
well,
Very different.
they are. I am learning that Echo, at least right now, is, and the trainer reminds us, like, he is a tool. You know, he's not a dog just to be pet, but he is very social to this point. So excited to see where that goes. But I think Kimber's going to relieve some pressure on him to let people pet his dogs. So
Awesome, thank you. Community development's not here. Are we bypass?
Yeah.
Finance.
Tough to follow up, Brandon. Here.
Yeah, good luck.
What kind of
Can't wait to
videos
see
do you
your
have?
logo.
You have my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have with finance.
Any questions for finance? Thank you. Administration.
I'll echo what Rob said. Any questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for administration? Thank you. Commission updates?
Just that we're actively recruiting for everything Sartell, and I believe we will have a planning commission recommendation for appointment at the first meeting in January.
Okay. And city council committee updates? Jill?
Nothing tonight.
Alex? Judd?
Nothing tonight.
The only thing I would offer is this is our only December meeting. So we will see everyone back in January. And I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Is
Second.
there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned.